allows the fight to continue.
This was certainly true of Quebec. Here, there was a strong traditional prejudice against the Jews.
A Jew is a survivor of 2,000 years of oppression, a survivor of a Holocaust, a survivor of Inquisition, a survivor of the most difficult thing, anti-Semitism all over the world. And he still identifies as a Jew. That is a miracle.
One of the first things Patti actually said to me was, "Do you know who I am?" I didn't at the time, but I sure know who she is now. She was a true legend, a force, somebody who adored politics, which, Speaker, was not always kind to her, but despite all the lows, she believed in the power of public service and always fought for her family and for her community.
You've just heard the voices of some of our honorable mention, including Rabbi Dovid Schochet, who established a large Chabad community in the Greater Toronto area 66 years ago. Lita-Rose Betcherman, who was a feminist rights activist and author of a book about fascism and anti-Semitism in Quebec. Alexander Eisen, a Holocaust survivor, and you heard the voice of Ontario's Minister of Long-Term Care, Stanley Cho, paying tribute in the legislature to the late Patti Starr, who helped him run for office, and despite Cho being Korean, was his self-appointed Jewish grandmother. As we're coming close to a break in the Jewish calendar's mourning period between Passover and Shavuot, Lag BaOmer, which is this coming Saturday and Sunday, we felt it was time to bring you another episode of the CJN Daily's recurring Honourable Mention podcast, where we pay tribute to those significant honourable men and women of the Canadian Jewish community who have passed away recently. On today's episode, you'll hear about Rabbi Dovid Schochet, also Jack Prince, a lawyer, a rags-to-riches Polish Jew who got the last ship out in the summer of 1939 from Poland and missed the Holocaust, then made it his life's mission to support Halifax and Israel's Jewish community. Harry Davis, the boxer and referee who spent nearly 70 years in the ring, and two women trailblazers, Lita-Rose Betcherman and Patti Starr, a leader with the National Council of Jewish Women in Toronto and one-time head of Ontario Place, but will always be remembered as well for going to prison for a while for illegally funneling money to Liberal politicians in the government of Premier David Peterson in the 1980s. I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, or a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News.
I can't date women right now because I'm too busy calling myself a piece of shit.
I had a dysfunctional Jewish mother and I had a dysfunctional Native mother.
I had 25 full years of utter struggle and failure.
I started to realize the absurdity of my inability to let go of this monster of guilt.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Hi, I'm Ralph Benrig. I'm the host of Not That Kind of Rabbi, where we look at people's spiritual journeys and take a little time for their self-reflection, and maybe yours. You can get it all at the cjn.ca/NTKR or wherever you get your podcasts.
And back in the co-host seat with me today is Ron Sillag, the CJN's retired reporter. Hi, Ron. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you as always, Ellen. Thank you.
Well, I know our listeners benefit so much from your personal knowledge and your connections to many of the Honourable Mention who we've profiled in the last 10 episodes. And Ron, this is number 11 since we started at the CJN Daily. So a milestone.
Yeah.
I think we should start off with Rabbi Dovid Schochet because he set up basically the entire Chabad network in the Greater Toronto area. What do you know about his early life?
Well, he was born in a place that we wouldn't normally associate with very religious Jews, and that was in Basel, Switzerland, unless you count Herzl's activity there. He was born in 1932 in Basel. He was the second of 10 children. His father was a rabbi, but the family was not of a Chabad background. They remained in Switzerland. They moved to Holland in 1947, where his father became chief rabbi of The Hague. And eventually the family came to Toronto, except for David, who at 19 went to study at the Central Chabad Yeshiva in Brooklyn, where he became very close to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, who became a bit of a mentor to him, gave him guidance and direction. Even though Dovid Schochet had his eye on becoming an electrical engineer. The Rebbe said he should abandon that or not necessarily abandon it, make a priority in doing Jewish outreach. And he asked him to, after he married, he asked him to move to Toronto and, according to the tribute we ran, transform the city into a haven for Jewish and Hasidic way of life. And that's pretty much what he did. It was a remarkable journey. He established a synagogue at the corner of Bathurst and Edinburgh Drive, just north of Wilson, yeah.
Where was the Jewish community before that, in the 50s?
This wasn't exactly in the heart of the Jewish community. The 1957, I imagine, the bulk of the community lived south of Eglinton, when Eglinton was considered kind of uptown. I guess they foresaw the growth of the community. And there, the community grew for the next 66 years. Today, they have about 45 Chabad centers in schools across the GTA. And that all started with Rabbi Schochet's work. And indeed, Chabad rabbis go to some very out-of-the-way places. And the idea is for them not to leave that place. They should have to stay there and make that community grow. And that's exactly what he did in Toronto. He became a great halachic authority, very humble man. And he died January 28th, and he was 91.
You go in the evening to sleep. You put your shoes near to bed. You expect him to be there. You make a broch on everything. We don't take items for granted.
I'm sure there's more that you want to tell us, but I want to go back to what you said. The family lived in Switzerland during the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. It was in this atmosphere that the family lived, but I want to just point out to our listeners that his father moved to The Hague in 1947 to reestablish Jewish life in that part of Holland for the Holocaust survivors who had made it or came back. Mm-hmm. And that was something very important. Even though they weren't Lubavitch there, they were very observant. And then what happened, what I was told by reading, I think his children wrote some articles in Aish, is that his uncle was very close to the Lubavitcher community in 770 Eastern Parkway, and so that's kind of how it all happened, that he went down to the yeshiva to get an education, because there wasn't a yeshiva like that in Toronto or in Canada. And then what I liked what she wrote, quote, "What really decided me was the pride in being Jewish that the Lubavitcher Hasidim exhibited. They openly wore yarmulkes and the tzitzis on the streets, and that impressed me very much."
His uncle was the secretary to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. His name was Mordechai Hodakov.
I also read that Rabbi Schochet was a descendant of a very famous 17th century rabbi called the Tosofos Yom Tov. So Yom Tov was his first name. He was the chief rabbi of Krakow, Prague, and Vienna, among other jobs. And he wrote a commentary on the Mishnah, died in 1654. An interesting side story about him as well, that when the community moved up from where you said it was Bathurst and Edinburgh to Thornhill, he said that's where the future is. So he moved up there, Rabbi Schochet, and there's a big Chabad gate and Bathurst Chabad headquarters there. And that's where he was the rabbi for many, many decades. Mm-hmm. Lived not too far away, and his home study with all his Sephorim, or all his books as they call it, was 24/7. He was available to answer questions about halacha and Jewish law all around the world. He was a scholar, and also he was the head of, was he not?
He was president of the Vadha Rabbanim, the Toronto Rabbinical Council as it translates, not the Toronto Board of Rabbis.
That was Rabbi Dovid Schochet. And now I'd like to ask you to talk about a woman here in Canada who actually lived in 3 cities, Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa. And that's Lita-Rose Betcherman.
Well, she definitely was a pioneer in women's rights in Ontario. In Jewish circles, she's probably better known as the author of really the first book to look at the rise of the far right and anti-Semitism in Canada in the 30s, with a particular emphasis on Quebec. She died March 9th, after just 2 days, I believe, after her 97th birthday. She had had a whole other existence before she wrote this book. She was Ontario was the first province to create a women's bureau at the Department of Labor. Betcherman was their second director from 66 to 72. And she was really the public face of the Women's Bureau. She advocated for equal working conditions and addressing pay discrimination. She was also active in the National Council of Jewish Women, the Citizens, and president of the Citizens Committee on Children. She then went back to school in the 60s and earned an MA. When she was starting to do her PhD, she was told that It's not a good idea for a woman to do it because she'd never get a job. She was born in Montreal, 1927. Her family had really first-hand experience with far-right fascism agitation. Her father was born in Romania. He was a shopkeeper. And he lived through that whole movement in Quebec called the Achat chez nous campaign. It was an attempt by the church and nationalist leaders in Quebec, including a figure called Adrien Arcan, to boycott businesses of all foreign businesses, but particularly Jewish ones. And she remembers Sunday sermons where the priests would, rail against the Jews. But the parishioners, it turned out, were disobedient, and they either walked out of the church or left after services and straight into her family's shop. So it affected them psychologically, but at least not in the pocketbook. So, as I say, when she sat down to write a book about the rise of the far right, this is interesting. She went to the stacks at the University of Toronto Library and found almost nothing. There was almost nothing written about this in Canadian Jewish histories up to that point. And so she blazed her own trail. The book was very slim. It was under 200 pages. Mm-hmm. It was published in 1975. And it shone a light on a very dark period in Depression-era Canada, when these fascist parties were considered, they were fringe, but they were still very influential. Just on a personal note, I was in university when the book came out, or I had just about starting it, and I was doing a project on this particular topic on not the rise of neo-Nazism, but Nazism in Quebec at the time. This was in the late 70s. And I thought, well, why not call up Lita-Rose Betcherman? And so I found her before the internet, folks, and found her through her publisher. And she called me back, and we had a nice long talk about how her book kind of ended at a certain point, but she didn't know too much about it, but she pointed me to the right scholars and the right people. And she couldn't have been, more gracious.
Did you get an A?
I think I did.
You better after that. Without the internet, oh my goodness.
Also, after she left the Women's Bureau, she was an arbitrator for about 20 years. She dealt with disputes between labor and management. She served on the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the Ontario Press Council, and the Ontario Judicial Council. She wrote other books too, something called The Little Band, Clashes Between Communists and the Political and Legal Establishments in Canada. Ernest Lapointe, who was Mackenzie King's great Quebec lieutenant, and Two Noble Sisters in 17th century England, about which I know nothing, I'm afraid. But you're right, she lived in 3 cities and was a strong supporter of the Jewish communities in all of them.
We talk a lot about None is Too Many, and that only came out in 1983. So she was already documenting the anti-Jewish tendencies of Quebec political leaders, which influenced, of course, Mackenzie King's thinking about getting into the war, saving Jews, all that. And she was actually before Irving Abella and Hesh Choper's book came out. Yeah, so exactly. They probably used it in their research.
100% they had to, because she also she delved into immigration records and had found that Jewish immigration to Canada well before the war was paltry and unwanted. But what was also interesting to some of us is that her book was handsomely illustrated with editorial cartoons from the era, which were just appallingly anti-Semitic. Just amazing that kind of thing. They weren't from the mainstream press, but they were readily available at the corner store.
And now we see them again in Montreal, Quebec, with Nosferatu, except it's Netanyahu, absolutely. So it hasn't gone far away from the roots of what she studied.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to move on to Halifax. We need to tell our listeners about this amazing community builder, Jack Prince, whose son Seymour has been a loyal CJN listener and sent us the notice that his father's funeral was happening.
He was a very special, accomplished man of high character and values. He was indeed a Jewish prince of a man. Many people of all walks of life during all my lifetime have told me, especially lawyers, and even lawyers who did not know him, that's the reputation my father had, and he leaves this world with a very good name.
A remarkable man, not much news out of Halifax, but boy, he certainly is worth noting. A real rags to riches story, the kind that begins almost as a cliche, that when he disembarks in Halifax Harbor in the summer of 1939, mere weeks before World War II broke out. He spoke no English. He died March 8th at the age of 96, and the last thing he did, apparently, was to adjust his will post-October 7th to leave $1 million bequest to impacted families. And right to the very end, he was thinking of philanthropy. He was just involved in every endeavor in Halifax, every Israel-based charity, every local charity.
Ron, you said earlier that he came to Canada on the last boat out of Europe, out of Poland, before the war, and he was 11 years old. How did that happen, that he came to Canada by himself?
He grew up in a town called Ludmir in Poland, described by his son as a place where you were either from or ultra from. So there was no middle ground. The boys all went to yeshiva, and there was really only one way out of Poland if you were a farmer or you were adopted. It turns out that there was a relative who lived in Halifax, and their 2-year-old daughter died. And they wanted to adopt a child from Poland. And they were sent 4 photos of 4 boys from Ludmir in Poland, where these boys lived and were born. And Jack won this photo contest. His 3 other brothers all perished in the Holocaust. So this is how he came to Canada. He was told that he was going to Canada for more liberal education, and they drummed into him the need to go to university. And he remembered waving goodbye to his mother until she was just, quote, a speck in the distance. He never saw his family again. So that's how he got out. He fulfilled his mother's wishes. He completed an undergrad science degree, 2 years of postgraduate work in chemistry and physics, and then pursued a law degree. And did well and supported, as I said, just about everything, including Camp Kadima. And
why did Israel mean so much to him?
Yeah, Hebrew University during the Six-Day War. He challenged other community members to match his $5,000 donation to Israel. In the 70s. He donated, this is a lot of money in the 70s, $25,000 to Bar-Ilan University in memory of his parents and brothers. So
why was he so motivated at the Six-Day War to get on the front lines in Halifax?
Because he believed that if Israel had existed in 1939, his family would have survived. And that's it. His final words, not final words, but his final recorded thoughts were, I'm 96, I've had a good life, we're leaving a wonderful legacy. And of course he was right.
So from law and philanthropy to the boxing ring, we have some colorful characters in the Jewish community of Canada's history. We have Lufspring and some boxers from the Y in Montreal who did well. But Harry Davis not only was a boxer, but then he went on the other side and, well, maybe he got hit a few times, but he put the referee's, suit on.
Not only that, but he was also a judge. So he did everything you could do in boxing except actually manage a fighter.
Tell me a bit about how he got to his start.
First, we should say that his participation in boxing spanned 77 years. He died in Toronto in March at the age of 97. He started boxing in the 1930s. He was described as this tall, long-armed kid. He never went pro. His amateur record was 15 wins, 5 losses. I don't know what weight class he was in, but that's pretty respectable. As a referee, he officiated at fights with really the top names in boxing. If you're a fan, you'll recognize these names. Lennox Lewis, George Foreman, George Chuvalo, Canadian. He judged fights with Francois Botha, Roy Jones, Shane Mosley, Bernard Hopkins. And he met people from what was called the golden age of boxing, if you want to call it that. Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey. And he even appeared in movies in cameo roles as a referee in a movie called The Hurricane by Reuben Carter. And Meg Ryan's movie, something called Against the Ropes. He played I believe he played a senior official in boxing. He wore dark blue boxing shorts. He was known for that, emblazoned with the Magen David, along with other Jewish fighters did that as well. It was a gift from Sammy Lufspring. And of course, Lufspring, we know, made the 1936 Canadian Olympic team, but refused to compete in Nazi Germany. And his probably high point came in 1975, just after, for you boxing fans, just after George Foreman lost the title in the Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire to Muhammad Ali. He boxed in an exhibition match in Maple Leaf Gardens in 1975, fought 5 opponents one afternoon. And it won't surprise you that Foreman won all of them.
All right. We're about ready for the first fight against Alonzo Johnson. Jerry Hipp is the ring announcer. The referee in this bout will be a veteran Canadian referee, one of the best in the nation, Harry Davis. He'll referee the first 3 bouts. The introduction again of George.
He refereed, Davis did, from 52 to 2001. That's amazing. He retired at the age of 75. So you have to be in very good physical shape and mentally acute to continue doing that.
Premier David Peterson was back in the legislature today after a trip to Eastern Canada, and the opposition took the opportunity to hammer the government on its standards concerning Patti Starr.
Patricia Starr, I knew her as Patti Starr, was very bold and very outspoken, and everyone who knew her knew that she got things done and knew how to get things done in her professional life with the Jewish community and the Ontario political world. The Patricia Starr affair was one of your big stories.
Yeah, the word that comes to mind following Davis was pugnacious, and I think that applied to Patti very much. She was a powerhouse in the community. She was a powerhouse fundraiser, and people knew her name. She was active in Canadian Jewish Congress, more closely associated with National Council of Jewish Women. She was a lay leader. She was a volunteer the whole time. She wasn't an employee. And ran afoul in the late 80s when the Globe and Mail revealed that she had diverted funds, misused funds from a provincial grant to make political donations to politicians, mostly provincial liberals. This blew up. David Peterson called an inquiry. The inquiry sat for a little while before it was declared unconstitutional and heard a lot of damning evidence. Patti was later charged with election finances offenses, provincial ones. Those were kind of dull and dry, but it did result in some convictions, and she paid, I believe, a fine of, I'm not sure what it was, I think it was $3,500. I don't want to guess, though. But more importantly, she was found guilty of fraud and breach of trust and sentenced to 6 months in prison. She certainly didn't serve 6 months. I believe she served something like 11 days before being moved onto a cottage on the grounds of the prison, and then she won, I believe, early parole. And she was fully pardoned, we should say, in the late 90s. She received a full and unconditional pardon from the government. But look, I know it's not fair to speak ill of the dead, and I don't intend to, but it is true that she negatively affected a lot of lives, both at the provincial political level, CFOs who were dragged under the bus by questionable donations and checks that looked kind of strange, each of which was examined in court.
You went to the trial?
I went to both trials. I covered both her election finances offenses and her criminal trial. But in the end, I think that was cut short. She ended up pleading guilty to some charges, and as I said, was fined. But the serious stuff came later when she was charged criminally and found guilty of 2 charges, fraud and breach of trust. And look, after she came out of jail, and I don't know how much, I don't know if she was remorseful or not. She did write a book called, she wrote several books. She wrote some novels, but she also wrote a book called Tempting Fate, which described her activities. I remember one thing she did get right, and she got a lot of things wrong in the book when it came to her accusations against coverage in the Canadian Jewish news. But I think she was probably right about this, is that for decades, the CJN ignored Jewish scoundrels, Jewish slumlords, Jewish criminals, and there was no shortage of them. Never, ever reported on them, and then suddenly started reporting on her. I think she probably had a point, but it was at a point where this story could no longer be ignored.
Because the mainstream press picked it up. It was in court. It was a big, big deal.
Well, the Toronto Star tends to overstate things, but yes, it was one of the great political scandals. And yes, you can even make the argument that she contributed to the downfall of a premier, David Peterson, who was deeply tainted by this, the perception that the party was beholden to developers and money from developers and money that was ill-gotten. And so he famously called the summer election, and the combination of a summer election and all this talk of scandal brought down his government. You know, she did get involved, as I said, after her release, she did get involved, I believe, in the Elizabeth Fry Society.
Yes, because she said that while she was in prison, she saw how the guards were mistreating the women and the conditions there. There was sexual abuse and all kinds of things.
Then she tried to help as many women as she could. And politically, she completely changed sides. She became quite the conservative and supporter of Stephen Harper later years.
Well, on that point, I was at the funeral. Our family is friendly with their kids, and she had five children and many grandchildren. She was quite a fixture at Temple Sinai in Toronto, and Michael Dolgan did the eulogy, and he went to visit her the day before she passed away, and her last words to him were, "Vote Conservative."
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
That was got a big laugh. She did have a side that many people don't know from her political side, and that's her family side. And I do think it's fair that we should talk about it because we'll put the link to her eulogy and the funeral service video in our show notes. Her family and children and grandchildren spoke lovingly of her as the person who started a family calendar in 1997. With some people maybe do the same with sending it around every year with people's pictures and the kids and birthdays. She was gave her grandchildren what's called bubby treats. She also had mandatory Shabbat dinners Friday night at her house, her whole family. If you didn't show up, that was it, doghouse for you. And the main thing that they said was that she held her head high when people talked to her about what happened in the Patti Starr scandal. She wasn't unrepentant for what she did because she said that's how things got done in those days in politics, and she was a woman in a man's world.
Sometimes she was difficult. She was the definition of a strong woman. There was no changing her mind. She always had a vision, be it for simple Rosh Hashanah dinners, in her beloved party room, or brokering complex deals between politicians. She'd have to have her way, and she usually got it. And she handled hard times with pride and fortitude. She never shrugged her shoulders. She never gave up. As many emergency medical teams can now attest to, when the Starr affair broke, her head was never held higher. She never showed weakness. After it was all done, instead of fading off into obscurity, she decided to write a book about her life and the scandal, fearlessly poking the bear.
Yeah, here's the question that I wish I and every other journalist in the city wish we had asked Patti Starr. Because throughout the proceedings, she kept saying the same thing, that this was a gray area of the law. Yes, she received advice from lawyers and tax accountants. If it was a gray area of the law, why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? Why put a charity in such risk, at such peril, and go ahead and do something that's really kind of a gray area? Well, the judge who sentenced her went on for about 20 minutes about what a remarkable volunteer she was and how strong she was and how she's a role model for volunteers, and we should all have this much strength and tenacity and commitment. On the other hand, a message has to be sent, and it sure was.
We have one more quick, short blast.
We escaped from the Buddhist ghetto and passed as Christians. We were liberated by the Russian army on January 1945. This was an extremely fantastic feeling. Although my sister and I, we went to our apartment, which was in the ghetto, we found it full of bodies because they used it as a morgue.
Alexander Eisen, a Holocaust speaker and survivor. Again, all the links are in our show notes. And Ron, that is it for Honourable Mention, episode 11.
Thank you, Ellen. It's been a joy.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this Honourable Mention episode of the CJN Daily. Thanks for everyone for listening to the CJN Daily.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.